Hi and welcome to my channel, Let's Talk Pilgrimage. In this video, we're actually talking about writing, specifically about journaling on a pilgrimage experience, journaling on a kind of a special world experience. And of course, I'm based here in Jerusalem, and a lot of it will deal with writing down your thoughts in a journal on a Holy Land pilgrimage or religious travels to the Holy Land. You've been out on the bus, you've been to the sites, you might have listened to a speaker, you've been out in the heat, and it's exhausting at the end of the day. Holy Land pilgrimage, which is a whole different video we'll be doing, is exhausting as most travel is. But even so, you need to structure and make some commitments about how you're going to engage, how you're going to experience, and certainly how you're going to record and remember a Holy Land experience. And the number one thing I advise, even beyond photos and videos, is recording your thoughts, is writing a journal. And I'm just going to give a couple of brief ideas about how to do that. This is a working conversation, and certainly in the chat below we can have some other ideas of how we do this. Of course, journaling can be about the events, just simply what you do. But the number one idea that I give for journaling on a pilgrimage, especially in a group setting, but even if you're in by yourself, is simply to record the voices and quotes of other people. If you're in the Holy Land, if you're in Santiago, if you go to Taizé, or just a domestic pilgrimage on your own, just for a week or 10 days, and all you did was write down an interesting quote, an interesting thought, something somebody else said, the things that you would have in your journal would be an absolute treasure. So about 30 years ago, as a young clergy, I went literally on an around the world pilgrimage. I journaled about all of my experiences, yes, what I thought about, the events that I did, but my strongest takeaway from those writings are literally quotes that I collected. Same thing with Santiago when I walked that. And now when I preach, when I write, some of the strongest quotes and material that I have are from my own experiences, but they're not my thoughts, they're thoughts of others. Now what would that consist of? Well, it does consist of things you've read. And I think one thing we might underestimate, even on a busy pilgrimage like in the Holy Land, is the importance or even the downtime in which reading is important. I know this is a bit exceptional, but on my around the world pilgrimage, I read about 40 books. And so I had all sorts of different content coming into my mind. So the first thing can just be a quote that you read about, but the quotes I'm talking about come from tour guides, they come from pastors and priests that you meet. It comes from the living stones or the speakers that you hear. But a lot of it just comes from yourself. The things that make a journal on a pilgrimage are the conversations you just have with one another. The things talking over lunch, over a cup of tea or coffee at the end of the evening. On the bus, as you're either talking about where you've just been or where you're going, as you're talking about each other's lives. And that in and of itself is a good reason to keep a small pad of paper wherever you go. So number one, just simply write down the voices of other people. Paraphrase them as you need to, but don't be afraid to go back to a person and ask them again to remind you, what did they say or what words they used. But again, just to say this one more time, to come away from the Holy Land with a journal of nothing but quotes of other people is one of the richest souvenirs and mementos that you can have of the trip. The second point about journaling that I want to talk about, and it will be the distinction between writing and just taking videos and taking photos. And that has to do with language. And I'm talking now about everyone. I'm talking about theologians. I'm talking about pastors and priests who might be on courses, but lay people, just everyday people. And that is theology, or engaging the experience, seeing the world. Ultimately, we have to use language. There's a lot of scholars, there's a lot of philosophers and writers who would even say that our experience is dependent upon the language that we use, that we conjure up, even the language that's in our minds. If I'm going to, in a very general sense, talk about even what pilgrim spirituality is, just think of that concept. To me, pilgrim spirituality is about giving meaning to experience through language. And ultimately, you can post all your videos and all the photos that you want to, but if you're going to give meaning to what you've experienced, you have to write it down. You have to wrestle with words. Some of these words just pop up into our mind, and they can also be words, go back to that first concept, words that we pick up from other people's quotes. That's why conversations with other people are so good. When we journal, we have to find words to describe our experience. And then if we're intentional about it, not just intentional about journaling, but we're intentional about the fact that the words are important, then it causes us to even look again to think about what the words mean. So let's quickly think about what type of language we might use on pilgrimage, what type of language we would think about in the Holy Land. And these words could be transformation, transcendence, awe, wonder. We could talk about various emotions, positive and negative, from gratitude to disappointment and expectation, even frustration and anger. And once we get words like awe and wonder, words like hope, I think by journaling intentionally, the next question to ask is, then what's the meaning of those words? And I don't mean to do this just in a circular exercise, but it's really about thinking intentionally about images and ideas, about what does awe mean? What does wonder? Is it an experience that takes us beyond ourselves? Well, then we not only have the language, then we have a concept or a word behind it. So a big part of journaling is thinking about language. And the function of that language is actually to give meaning to the experience that we had. And just to say it again, there's a strong relationship between language, experience, and meaning. Now let's talk about that a little bit more. There's a lot of research and studies about how flawed our human memory is, about how difficult it is actually to remember things, and a difference between what has been described as the experiencing self and the remembering self. And to be very honest, and people have talked about that, so often, even when we plan vacations, even when we plan pilgrimages, and even the way that we execute those through photos and all, we're only really appealing to the remembering self, the person who on the far end is going to remember that experience. In a way that can't be helped, because the remembering self just dominates the experiencing self. In fact, there's some interesting experiments that have been done on that says that what a person remembers after an experience is not so much the duration of kind of normal experience, but what they remember is kind of the average about the most intense experience that they have, whether that's positive or negative, and how an experience actually ends. Those 2 points are going to be the most important points in terms of how you remember good or bad an experience. So it doesn't have to do with journaling. It has more to do with planning the trip or executing it. But this sense of how your last day goes and how you wrap something up is so vital to your memory of it. But what journaling does is helps record in real time your experiencing self. That is, as long as you're journaling, on a regular day-to-day basis. And it can be very important or interesting, depends on how you want to use a journal, that the importance of journaling your experiences is to help your remembering self really to relive that. Because if you don't have those moment by moment experiences, what you are going to remember are just simply the highlights and kind of this average between the highs and lows and how it ended. But the duration, the ordinary, is going to fall from the wayside. Now that gives us another interesting thing. We might think about just journaling the highlights, journaling the things that that really excite us, and frankly, that makes sense. But you might discipline yourself to talk about the ordinary. What are the ordinary? I think of pilgrimage sometimes as kind of this paradox or the juxtaposition that we find the ordinary in the extraordinary, just as we find the extraordinary at times in the ordinary. And so when you're journaling, it might be these random things that seem so ordinary. A trip to the post office, the fact that you have to do your laundry, just the times you're hot and thirsty. But just the kind of these ordinary moments can be ways of giving texture to the memories of your pilgrim experience. And so when we think about writing, these are things we want to do. We want to record other people's voices. We want to record our experiences in real time. And we want to do that, the latter part, for one further reason. If we talk about the fact that pilgrimage is transformational, religious travel, even if we don't call it pilgrimage, changes us, that we are different from the person who began, from the person who started. Back to studies of memory, when we change, when we're transformed, when we see things differently, the human memory is very poor at remembering how we were before. So now if we're being transformed for the good, that's fine. You might not be interested in this. But if you want to chart for yourself a sense of how you have changed, how you have improved, that's another reason to journal. And in that case, it's not about the voices of others, nor is it even about necessarily your emotions or your activities, but it's giving some attention to what you're actually thinking at a given time, your attitude about something, your position on something. And true, that can be difficult because there's no way to really forecast what particular part of your attitude, of your faith, of your biblical knowledge, of your experience with a particular person, how that's going to change. And we can't really forecast that, but that's another strategy about what to do in a journal. Not just simply record what you did, but the more you can get into emotions, but also thoughts and positions of what you think about something, helps at the end for you to see how your attitudes have changed. Because if you don't, it's very hard to convince yourself that you ever thought a certain way or you ever had a certain opinion. So that's it for journaling. I'm standing here in front of all these blank pages, but that's what the whole exercise of journaling is. It comes in terms of a challenge when we're tired, when we need sleep, when we have the good option of having another conversation with somebody, but taking time in a daily moment to record the voices of others, to record our emotions, to record our thoughts and our feelings in the experience of when they're actually happening, not only gives us content to think about, to process, to teach, to write, to preach on, but allows us to see how God has been at work in our lives over the course of the pilgrimage, how we are a part of a transformational process in the ways that we think, love, and feel towards ourselves, God, and others. So that's me. Let's talk pilgrimage, but let's write about pilgrimage at times as well. The journal, whether it's in the Holy Land or on a mission trip or any form of religious travel, is so important for us to develop that sense of self-awareness, that sense of spiritual growth, and that sense of using it as a way of collecting the voices of other people that we encounter on the road and on the pilgrimage journey. Thanks. That's me from Jerusalem. See you next time.